But with that, folks, I think I want to bring up the entire panel. I think we all understand what's at stake. I also think we all understand how far we have fallen, but it's time that we all start having these conversations. I try to do it with humor. Everyone's going to have a different way. There's ways to do it respectfully. But I think people have to understand just how fragile it is. When you look at what's going on in the world, when you look at what they've done, when you look at the places, again, as I opened up with, that we looked at, like, hold on, Viva, get out of here. When you look at what's happening, understand that it does not get better from here. You know, just because, like, if they can do it to a Trump, right, someone who has a following, who has the means to fight back, who has, you know, the will to fight back, and if they can do it to someone like that, who won't they do it to? More importantly, if they do it to that, doesn't it send the message that they're going after anyone who will stand in their way? So we need to collectively make sure that people are awake to exactly what's going on, that we can combat this insanity before the incredible things that our countries were founded on, the freedoms that we've enjoyed for so long, that we fought for, blood, sweat, and tears through generations, before that disappears, because it is very much on the table, and they're not even pretending about it anymore. So thank you so much, Toronto. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Donald J. Trump Jr., thank you for making the journey. Unbelievable. Well, we have less than an hour left, but we've got the whole panel on the stage. You've already met everyone except for the keystone of today's event, a person without whom we would not be here. We would not be here today because, as Don Jr. said, there was a $50,000 extortion by the government landlord, the Crown Corporation called Canada Lands Company, that tried to block this event. And were it not for the resources of Rumble.com, we would have been canceled by the government. That's an example of a dedication to freedom of speech that you rarely see.
Yeah.
Without further ado, let me turn the mic over to our host in so many ways, including the host of so many freedom-oriented live streams, a Canadian who's done well in the world, amazing work, Chris Pavlovski.
Thank you, Ezra. With this, first off, this wouldn't have been possible without Rebel helping us out and getting this off the ground. So thank you to Rebel. And to the Rumble staff, I don't know if you guys know, but we put this event together in about 2.5 weeks. We threw it together as fast as possible. These bills that are coming out of Canada are of like incredible concern to me. And me being a Canadian, born and raised in Toronto, and watching how things have changed since I remember being in the playground in elementary school and just saying, we have free speech, we could say whatever we want, to where we are right now is just absolutely appalling. And I thought it was like incredibly important to bring a lot of talent to Canada to talk about how important and how much of a human right free speech, freedom of expression really is. And I want to thank the guests that have come from Brazil, I guess Viva now from Florida, and then also Don and Kim from Florida as well. So a big round of applause to the One more thing I want to add is that Dawn, I got a call from Kim like a couple days ago, and she was like, Chris, Dawn's in surgery right now. And I was like, oh, what happened? And she was like, but don't worry, we're coming to Toronto no matter what. So a huge round of applause to Dawn.
That's amazing.
Not a snowflake.
real toughness, like to be coming all the way over here and going through all that just to be here and raise our voices about how important freedom of expression is. I guess we'll start off with Viva. I think you being from here and understanding kind of the genesis of what has happened in Canada and how we've gotten from a society that we all agreed unanimously that freedom of expression is a human right that allows everything to happen. You don't have civil rights movements, you don't have women's rights movements, you don't have anything without freedom of expression. It is like the cornerstone to a democratic and free society. Without it, it's over. It's completely over. And that's just getting demolished right now by the current government, which is, I never thought in my lifetime it would be something I'd be fighting for the way I'm fighting for it right now. But you as a Canadian kind of really picked this apart over the last 10 years and watched this happen from a legal standpoint. What's your thoughts? How do you feel being a Canadian these days?
It's an interesting thing. Like Canadians, we've always prided ourselves off being polite and to some extent subservient, but not in an insulting way. And what I've realized is being polite and subservient, it's good for neighbors, but it's not good for government. And the government is supposed to... I had that thought earlier today. I said, I got to write that down and get it out. But we are polite. We like being loving and we like being tolerant. But there's a difference between that and selling the rope to the government that's going to hang you with it. And that's what we're doing right now by sacrificing the liberties that many of us didn't have to fight and die for. We inherited them, and therefore we don't truly appreciate how special they are. But Don, I have to also say this. You thought the 2S LGBTQIA+ was bad. There was a tweet. There was a tweet coming out talking about asexuality. This is from the government of Canada. I mean, the $50,000 is going to good causes. It says, did you know that asexuality includes a wide spectrum of sexual and romantic orientations? And you have members of Parliament, Pascal Saint-Onge, tweeting this out. It's nuts. But the bottom line, we're witnessing it, and we sort of feel that it's virtuous to do what the government says because it makes us feel safe. It makes us, let them think that they're providing security for us. But at the bottom line, we are literally, on the one hand, giving away freedoms that we didn't fight for, and they're not ours to give away. They're ours for our children. And we are selling the government the rope that they're using to tie us up.
I'd like to build on something you said there, Viva. Freedom of speech is a strategic freedom upon which the others rely. So when we talk about our fundamental freedoms, especially here in Canada, we talk about freedom of association, freedom of assembly, the right to vote. But think about it. None of those things would be meaningful without the underlying free speech. I mean, if you didn't have freedom of speech, you could have meetings, you could have association, you could have a vote, but it would all be meaningless. I've heard it said, take away all my other freedoms, but leave me freedom of speech, because with it, I'll win the rest back. I wouldn't want to put that to the test, but I think it's true. Glenn, I want to ask, if I may, for the global perspective, I mean, you're right in the thick of it in Brazil where there's some real censorship battles going on. Can you give us about a minute around the world? What's the situation? Maybe Chris can weigh in on that too, because of course, as a platform, he's under direct attack by 100 different countries' censorship. Can you give us just a bit of a survey?
Yeah, I mean, I actually do want to begin by embarrassing Chris a little bit and talking about it from the perspective of Rumble and how important it's become, precisely because I think I said this at the very beginning, actually, though I'm here in Canada, I was motivated by the excesses of C-63. I'm not Canadian, so if that were just Canada, I would probably leave that to Canadians and give you a kind of support from a distance. The reason I feel compelled to come here is because it is a global trend. It's feeding off one another, every country. Every time one country moves one step forward, it's a signal to every other country that they can as well. I think one of the things I've come to value most in the work I've done in journalism, politics, are not just people who wave banners and claim belief in a certain cause, so that is very important, but the people who are willing to sacrifice their self-interest for those causes. I remember when I was a kid, like one of the heroes I had was the ACLU, which at the time was actually what they claimed to be, nonpartisan free speech organization filled with Jewish lawyers, primarily Jewish donors on the left, and they defended the right of the Nazi Party to march through Skokie, Illinois, kind of a town filled with Holocaust survivors, and they almost destroyed their organization, but did so because they felt the principle that the government can't dictate who can march and who can't, obviously they despise the Nazi Party, was so vital to protect. And then I've seen people like Julian Assange end up in a prison, a high security prison, where he's wasting away. And my friend and source, Edward Snowden, who's in exile in Moscow, these are the people who I most admire, who are knowingly sacrificing their personal interests for a cause. Rumble, the reason I came to Rumble, I've always done written journalism, I've never done video journalism. One of the main reasons is because I think they're the only major platform. I think Elon Musk at Twitter is doing an important job enunciating this cause, rhetorically defending it. Rumble has shown that they're not just willing to defend it rhetorically, they're willing to protect everybody who's on that platform, left, right, anything in between or beyond. But even more importantly, they will defy the censorship order of governments. When governments tell them, we want this person off your platform and this view banned, or you will not be able to be in our market, they say, we'd rather not be in your market than obey unjust censorship demands. And I can't stress the importance of that enough.
Chris, are you at liberty to tell us a few examples or anecdotes?
Yeah, there's a lot of them, unfortunately. I guess like the thing that kind of strikes me the most is that the amount that we're receiving means the other platforms are also receiving these requests, and they're probably receiving a lot more. So the most recent example, which I thought was very ironic because, I'll go back to the first place to ban us was China. No surprise there. That's what communists would do. They would shut down voices that they don't agree with. But then the second place that threatened to take us offline was France. And they specifically said that we needed to remove news sources from Russia. So like Russia Today, Sputnik, etc. They needed to come off Rumble. And they didn't violate any of our policies. And on the principle of free speech and the principle of what we do, we told France to go pound sand. Bye. And we allowed them to continue streaming, and we shut off access to France entirely. Then, in the last month, and just recently confirmed, now we see Russia blocks Rumble entirely. So we've had Brazil, China block us, we've had France block us, and then ironically Russia blocks us, and then we ended up leaving Brazil as well. We've had orders now, aggressive orders coming out of India. That seems to be the next place that is getting very censorious. And we have also received requests from the Australian government and the New Zealand government. And the requests are getting very weird lately, like to the point where it's like not even a debate whether you should take it down or not, but I'm guessing the other platforms are complying. So the New Zealand request was really appalling. So there was a whistleblower in New Zealand that it was with respect to the Ministry of Health during the COVID restrictions on lying on COVID data. And the New Zealand Ministry of Health came to us to remove that creator. Obviously, we're not going to do that. We're telling them to pound sand as well. But the fact that you have like the Ministry of Health in New Zealand coming to a journalist that reported on the whistleblower to remove the journalist, that's like akin to the Pentagon Papers in the 70s and the New York Times, which was already been ruled in the Supreme Court as like, that's, free press. Like, that's completely allowed. And the nerve that the governments have to even the New Zealand government or the Australian government, all these governments, the nerve that they have to censor and to even ask us about that is just appalling. Like, I can't even imagine the day that would happen in a Western democracy. But here we are. We're sitting here today, and we're sitting here for really good reason, and that's because of this.
Don Jr., let me jump in. When our Rebel News journalists went to Davos, Switzerland for the World Economic Forum, the two names we heard the most on the lips of the delegates there were number one, Donald Trump, and number two, Elon Musk, but it was sort of a surrogate for how do we get censorship back. And I think they were linked. I think the whole call for banning misinformation is another way of saying it's 2024, people, we got to stop public enemy number one. How much of censorship do you think is just about rigging or tilting the US presidential election?
I mean, I think it's very significant. I mean, I sort of spoke about it in my speech, talking about sort of these places that we viewed as bastions of freedom and democracy, you know, perhaps under somewhat different rules, but New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the US, the UK, Ireland. And yet, if you look at what's going on in those places, you realize just how dangerous that are, and more importantly, how emboldened they've become in actually just flagrantly doing it. You know, I see it on all the platforms. I do my own social media, for better or worse. People are like, do you do that yourself? I was like, you think I could pay someone to post the stuff that I actually put up there most of the time? Solid point. And, you know, I see it. On my Meta platforms, I'm doing 10% of what I used to do on average. You know, and I know what it's going to do, because I do it myself. So when I hit send, you know, hey, I know that's filler, or I know that's going to go big. I know what's going to happen. And, you know, if I get a decent post right now, it's 50,000 likes. If I'm following certain people, it may show up to me, but someone who isn't following that person, hey, check him out. Search him. What do you mean? Here's his exact handle. You know, on page 15 of the scroll, it seems like a lot of these institutions now are actually incorporating AI, and Chris could probably speak to this more, because I know we've had sort of conversations offline in that, where they understand now the cry from people about the censorship. So now what they're trying to do is actually cover up the censorship, so it appears as though they're not doing it. You can see the people you're already following, but no one else ever will. You'll never be able to grow your engagement. You're sort of trapped there, but you get enough viewership that it's not like, what happened? I was one of the first people complaining about, Twitter 1.0 censorship, and I think there's still plenty in 2.0. But in Twitter 1.0 censorship, how do you know you're being shadow banned? It's like, well, yesterday I was averaging 5,000 retweets a post. Today I'm averaging 7. They're like, well, 7,000. I go, no, 7, like single digits. Like something happened, right? Someone flipped the switch. Ironically, the time I saw my best engagement in Twitter in the last, I guess since we entered politics, we did real well before that when, had a TV show and we're popular and we're apolitical. At least, I was political, but not, outwardly, because I grew up in New York City and, play the game. And it was during the time frame where there was the gap, where no one knew which way Twitter was going. Elon kind of had it under contract, but it didn't look like it was going. Twitter 1.0 was desperately trying to hold on. They were trying to prevent, but at the same time, because they weren't knowing, it's like they burned the files, right? All the algorithms disappeared. I gained like 3 million followers in like a 4-week period. I was averaging 10,000 likes a post because they just pulled off all of the stops because they weren't sure. They didn't want to get caught. Obviously, some great other journalists, did, whether it was Matt Taibbi and others that got into the Twitter files and just how much they'd been manipulating. But now they're just getting smarter about that manipulation. So I think it's very much on point. I think a lot of those globalists that would be at Davos, I'm sure, are working with big tech. Because again, the fact I always say in America that our elections are even close, and they're won by basis points, not percentage points, but by basis points, when you consider that you're up against the entirety of a $1 trillion big tech complex that is devout leftist. I mean, just the marketing department of the radical left, plus another $1 trillion institution, which may not be worth that much anymore because I think they've done such a big disservice to themselves. You can't avoid tech. You use it in every part of your life. You sort of can't avoid the mainstream media at this point because there's other alternatives. I think Chris has done an incredible job creating that here at Rumble. And I think that's given all of us platforms to talk about it, which is why we have followings and the other people don't have that same kind of credibility. But you have multi-trillion-dollar platforms that are functioning as the marketing department of the opposition. It's truly amazing that it's even close, which leads me to believe that we do have a great chance if we can get people to understand that, but they're also getting smarter about just how much they're willing to manipulate things. And the answer is they're willing to manipulate things incredibly.
Kim, can I ask you a question? Because you're a former prosecutor, and I was touched by what Glenn said, that back in the day, lawyers took cases on principle, Jewish lawyers defending KKK marchers. That's quite something. What's happened? Is it in the law schools? Is it in the profession? Is it political appointment of judges. Why are so many prosecutors happy to prosecute free speech?
Well, it's very disturbing what I see going on, as a former prosecutor, like you mentioned, and as a, journalist, to see just the disintegration of the legal system, to see the weaponization at the highest level of the government institutions that we used to revere. Like Glenn and I talked about, people that used to feel like they were working for the good guys, for the white hats. And I felt like that when I was a prosecutor and prosecuting cases in California and cases up through the appellate division, up through the United States Supreme Court. And then you see now the juxtaposition and this moment in American political and legal history where all of those institutions have now become weaponized, and you see just the proliferation of lawfare to the point where it is being used as, the tip of the spear to influence the United States presidential election in a way that is tantamount to election interference. We see it with using gag orders, where people who are in the case are able to go outside, talk, make comments to the press, like the Michael Cohens of the world, but the former president of the United States of America is not allowed to make a statement, is not allowed essentially to defend himself, and the system that is supposed to stand and fight for justice and that ability to defend yourself, for due process, to uphold the Constitution, is bringing the whole House down on him, and he is not able to. And if he does make any statement to defend himself, then they are threatening him with, fines, more punishment, incarceration, we will throw you in jail. And I just had to take a moment and sit back, and I've discussed this with Alan Dershowitz on my show, and I know you're going to be interviewed and meeting with him soon. He is appalled by it. And to further answer your question, it is coming down from those high government institutions, whether it's DOJ and FBI and CIA, IRS, down through our legal system, down through our court system, at the appellate level, at the trial level, down to the local district attorney offices, et cetera, and then infiltrating into our educational institutions, into the law schools, changing the way the law is, total disregard for the Constitution, and now we see an indoctrination of sorts by those educators to the future lawyers that are coming forward. And I think it is a shame, because it's happening in, as we know, in colleges across the United States, universities, and institutions of higher learning, whether it's business schools and legal schools, all of the above. Law schools are being infiltrated. And I think that if I were to sit in those classrooms today, like I used to so proudly years ago, getting my law degree, I would find a very different learning environment, and I think that's a shame.
Ezra, Perhaps the one thing to add to that, talking about the ACLU defending the KKK. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. I graduated college, I moved to New York, and 9/11 happened, and the same white shoe law firms, often, would have been in New York City, they were rushing to defend the 9/11 hijackers and the other people caught up in that terrorist thing. But those same white shoe law firms in New York City wouldn't dare defend the former president of the United States just 20-something years later. So, that perhaps just to show the extremity of it, it's not just their unwillingness to do this, it's an unwillingness based on political spectrum, not even speech. There's a consequence to being even a little bit conservative or a little bit right-wing. That's when you get attacked. So the fact that these people would rush to try to defend people who committed perhaps the most atrocious attack on American soil ever, those people have a right to defend themselves and have the highest level of defense afforded to them possibly in America. Mm-hmm. A former sitting president, someone who was once lauded in that same town, won't even get a call back. That's just the perspective of how far things have fallen and the dichotomy that exists.
Can I just add one point to that, which is, for me at least, the fact that, say, big law firms or the ACLU after 9/11 wanted to jump in and kind of test the government's theory. There were all these new theories about how we can imprison people. Do we need to charge them with crimes? Can we pick them up on American soil? I'm glad those got contested. I think that's what journalism and law should be doing is testing the limits of government power. The problem for me is the second part, which is that they refuse now to apply those principles that we've all been taught were so important to apply universally in any case that might be perceived as benefiting the people Donald Trump represents, Donald Trump himself, even though there are similarly radical theories being employed to criminalize him and that movement. I think that's the problem, is people are now unwilling to challenge power in the way they used to. And the reason for it, I just think is so important too, is, I was talking earlier about 2016 and Brexit and the election of Donald Trump, which is what traumatized Western elites into embracing an explicit theory of censorship. What happened there was they could have said to themselves, wait, why did the British people decide to leave this sacred institution, the European Union? And why did people decide to embrace somebody like Donald Trump instead of Hillary Clinton, like this outsider instead of this insider? And had they engaged in an honest self-assessment, they would have said, we, the institutional forces of authority, have gone wildly off track. The people hate us because we're not serving their interest any longer. And they couldn't do that because that would undermine the legitimacy of their power. So what they did instead was they invented an excuse. Oh, there's too much free speech. Russia is allowed to manipulate our population. That's the only reason they're angry. Not because we're bad, but because Russia tricked them into thinking that we're bad. Or there's people who are lying. They're right-wing disinformation agents. And that's what we need to control. And that's always how authoritarianism happens, is you invent threats, and then you tell people you have to give up rights, give up all limits in defense of those threats. And that's why there's no more ethos, like you guys were saying. Why aren't law firms willing to stand up and say these radical theories of prosecution being used against Trump and his movement, to call them insurrectionists, should be contested? It's because it's now taboo to apply those principles universally. And I think that's where things have gone so wrong.
Just to highlight one thing that might have been forgotten, or at least not mentioned, it's not just the weaponization of all of these bodies, it's going after the lawyers that do it. It's not just going after Trump. John Eastman, Jeff Clark, Jenna Ellis, lawyers indicted for giving legal advice. And it highlights the problem of licensure, where once it's in the power of the government, it gets weaponized and abused to go after the political disfavored. And I would also highlight, replace political prejudice with racial prejudice, and what we're seeing today is exactly analogous to what we saw decades ago in the southern states that the lefties of today like to deride and defame. And also one thing, Chris, on going after Rumble. It's not just a question of the countries asking that Rumble take down various channels, various accounts. I said this a while back, I don't know if you remember it. They're going to go through the standard attacks, defame Rumble, call it a right-wing whatever, try to go after Chris, but he's a pretty squeaky clean guy, so they haven't done the hit pieces on him yet. But, run those stupid ads with channels and then say, look what they're running ads next to these hateful channels. They're coming after them with legislation now, and that's also what people need to truly understand. They're going to try to legislate the competition out of business and legislate the competition into silence. Because, when they come out with the link tax, disguised tax in my view, but for Google to pay $100 million a year, that's just the cost of doing business while catering to the government that lets you. For smaller companies, I think Rumble could probably afford it, but they're going to criminalize the content that's on Rumble, they're going to criminalize the content that's on Twitter, and then they're going to go after the executives to say you are hosting hateful conduct under our new legislation, and that's how they're going to shut them down.
Yeah.
Good luck, Chris. I'm sorry. I hope I didn't give anybody any ideas.
Viva, can I ask you a question? Because you and Don Jr. have described an absolute politicization of prosecutions and judges that actually I don't think it's been so brazen in Canada. In Canada, it's more passive and quiet, but I don't think we've seen the politics of personal destruction as much in our country, which I'm puzzled by, because in the States they have the First Amendment, and I think they have more robust checks and balances. Is it coming to Canada? Is that what C-63 is? Or have they silenced all their critics to begin with?
I would say it's coming to Canada, and it's being imported to Canada by Justin Trudeau. Like, freezing of the bank accounts is weaponizing the system.
Right.
Pre-trial detention of Tamara Leach for weeks. Chris Barber, Pat King. You may not think you like these people, but we've seen the weaponization of the system. Denying bail for nonviolent mischief charges is absolute horse crap. So we're seeing it here. In the States, it's out of control. I mean, the Constitution is all fine and well, but to quote a judge, her name is Judge Darkey, in this case out of New York, Dexter Taylor. He's a man who just got convicted. He hauled off to Rikers Island for assembling firearms in his apartment with lawfully procured kits. The judge in that court, allegedly, according to reporting, said, don't bring the Second Amendment into this court. This is the state of New York. The Second Amendment doesn't exist here. You have, and this has been reported, and you have like states defying Supreme Court rulings.
Exactly.
So what you have is total political lawlessness just based on political leaning.
You know, I guess the heart of your answer is we have it worse. It's just that they're going after the Tamara Leaches of the world and the Arthur Pavlovskys of the world rather than the Donald Trumps of the
How
world.
many? Arthur Pavlovsky, Pastor Coates. There's a number of pastors locked up and denied bail. Meanwhile, the dude who drives a truck into people at the Winnipeg protest let on a bail. It was a big bail, but it's weaponizing and applying different rules to different people depending on ideologies. We're seeing it in Canada. We're just more complacent and more polite, and we don't want to fight. But there are, I think there's a lot of us who are fighting, but there's definitely a different sort of culture that probably should change sooner than later.
Hey, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the other distinction here is that, the political power in Canada is all for this censorship. It's all for this. It's the grassroots movements in Canada that are all for freedom. Whereas it's a little different in the United States. You have people in power that are fighting for freedom and fighting for rights, whereas you don't have that really in Canada quite yet. Not yet anyways, but I hope that changes in due time. One of the things that, that we just experienced, which is, it talks a lot about the media here in Canada, and we had hit piece after hit piece after hit piece, the Globe and Mail, and it goes on, CTV, you name it. When it came to Rumble and blocking France for allowing Russian outlets on Rumble based on free expression and not violating our terms. But not a single paper in Canada. We're a $2 billion market cap company. We're not small. We have the biggest influencers in the world on our platform, including his dad and Don and many others, Kim, Glenn, Viva. And not a single paper, both in the US and Canada, covered the fact that Russia blocked Rumble.
Right.
What does that say? The bias is written by not writing. And you can all see it, because when we protected things we may or may not agree with, they come after us. But when they shut us off, they don't want to let you know that they shut us off. In fact, YouTube's still running in Russia perfectly fine, which means, obviously, that they're taking some kind of orders and complying. So these are the questions that need to be asked, and it's...
Hey, Chris, from one accused Russia agent to another, you're doing a really lousy job as an agent of Russia, just so we're clear,
How did you
okay?
shut yourself down?
Yeah.
Chris, one of the important things about today has been to ring the alarm. And I think we need to. Before people can take steps to fix things, they need to know there's a problem and what the problem is. But people can be demoralized or depressed a little bit. This is what you do full time. You are the leading free speech platform in the world, and you're big, $2 billion market cap. So you brush up against other big people, some enemies, but some allies too, I hope. Can you give us a few green shoots of hope? Are there other people in this battle? Are there other governments? Are there other forces that maybe we should be excited about or hopeful for?
So, I guess the first thing is that Rumble does have a $2 billion market cap, and that is a huge honor and a huge success, because we're pushing the envelope. We're the tip of the spear for freedom of expression, and that shows that there's a lot of people that really believe in what we're doing, and that's the biggest honor of all. I will say that I think things are starting to tilt our way, and they're starting to tilt our way a lot quicker. We have the biggest influencers in the world are on our side, whether they're not saying it or whether they're saying it, and we have lots that are saying it as well. But there's a lot of influencers that are definitely on our side that haven't really kind of spoken out yet. And I think that the scales have really tipped a big time in the United States. And I think in Canada, it's not quite there yet. People are still afraid. They're still afraid to voice things. Canadians just approach things a little bit different than they do in America. In America, it's just like, they say whatever they want, whereas in Canada, we're kind of like tight-lipped. You know, you get bank accounts shut down if you're out dancing with hockey sticks in the middle of a winter. Like, it's a different environment over here. But I will say that, like, you know, Rumble is an example of that success. The influencers and the shows on Rumble are demonstrating that success. I do think in the United States we are seeing like a major movement towards freedom and free expression in the defense of that. When I first started, I remember half of America was like, I remember reporters saying like free speech on TV is like another word for hate speech. And I was like, freedom
is the rallying call. It was freedom is the rallying call of the far right was a CBC article, I believe, that they ran.
No, this was CBS, the one I was thinking about. They're making freedom of expression to like hate speech. And I was like, what? Like, how did we get the women's rights movements, the civil rights movements? That's because of free speech. Like, free speech is like the cornerstone of democracy. And I think in the last 2 years, since I think it was CBS that did that live on air, I think like the majority now are like, I think I saw a poll, it was like 69% of Americans now think that, you know, not only do they believe in free speech, but they believe they're being infringed too much. Yeah. So like the scales have tipped. And like, you have to think like a lot of different things, Rumble, X, people, the public square, the whole parallel economy that's now kind of like exploding right now, right underneath us, and it's kind of really coming out of the United States. The U.S. is like the place to fight right now, and I think it's winning big, and I'm really hopeful that it's going to kind of leak into Canada, and I think it is. This is why we're here, and people know how important it is. Look at this room; it's full, it's sold out, and it's.
I think Canadians are ready.
What's that?
I think Canadians are ready, right?
Don, there's a quirk in Canada that sometimes Canadian politicians and Canadian journalists don't care as much about the Canadian reaction as American reaction and foreign reaction. I saw the Toronto Star sort of shocked and excited at the same time that you were coming here.
Yeah, me too. I was like,
and so I want to say thanks to everyone here for helping raise the alarm around the world, because Trudeau cares a lot about his international reputation, maybe even more than he cares what Canadians think of him. Can I ask you a question? If there's a 2024 victory for your father, can you think of changes? A lot of fans here, a lot of fans.
it could be worse. Keep going.
You're amongst friends.
We need a Canadian Trump.
You're amongst friends. Is there something that you think should be changed that's within the power of the government? Is there some policy or some budget or some office that's an easy change to strengthen free speech?
Well, I think you have to just eliminate so much of it. I mean, I think the bureaucracies have gotten so big. There's no accountability. There's no consequence. You get in a position of power, and even for those, I see it. They enter politics oftentimes, perhaps for the right reason, but there's sort of the saying, the swamp is undefeated. You get there, and I ask guys this. I go, why doesn't that guy fight harder? It felt like he went in. Well, he was a state legislator, didn't get paid for 15 years, and. He shared a last name with someone who was a congressman for 25 years. The guy dies. He basically walked into his seat because, it's like The Distinguished Gentleman, the Eddie Murphy movie. It's the name you know. Yeah. So, this guy becomes a congressman from nothing, and all of a sudden there's people kissing his ass. And he's invited to the cool person party, and he's got to see it. And guess what? He's never leaving. And so, for me, the big thing is just eliminating as much of that government as possible, breaking down those institutions, making sure you don't have that permanent bureaucracy, right? It's sort of like the Anthony Fauci's of the world. Like, I think you can look at his record and realize that at no time was he ever the best doctor in anything. But he was the best bureaucrat. He was the best snake. He never met a camera he didn't love. If you stood in his way, even if you were right, he'd burn you to the ground and perpetuate that. And so I think you have to get rid of that entrenched bureaucracy as best as possible. I think we're much more in tune to be able to do that in a second term, because the first time we came in not knowing. Like, why didn't you do this? I was like, well, we assumed, by the way, I assumed it. When they went after me, I assumed, well, the FBI, I mean, the CIA, they said I did something wrong. I know I didn't do anything intentionally, but maybe I met with someone that was an agent. There must be, I wanted to believe that everything I was told about America and the patriots that work in public service, it's bullshit, okay? The entire foundation we've been sold for our entire lives is a lie. And so I think we have to break down that bureaucracy, put people in there who don't need the job, who it's not their turn, it's not the next line of progression to perpetuate the same bureaucracy that caused all these troubles. And then I think you end up doing it to what Chris is saying, in the public sector, where corporate America has become so entrenched with that because they do control Washington, D.C. with the money. Whether it's what we see with the military-industrial complex and the never-ending wars, whether it's what you see with big tech and basically owning Congress, not just the Democrats, but the Republicans who, in front of a small group of 3 people in their home state, they'll tell you what you want to hear, but they'll still vote to give Meta unlimited power, or Google unlimited power, or whatever it may be. And so, simultaneously, to Chris's point, that emergence of the parallel economy, where people can take the time to not just feed Amazon and their lobbyists, Google and their lobbyists, find the small businesses, give them your money, take the time, there's an entire network emerging of people who've had enough, that they understand what's going on, and they're voting with their wallets as well. And when you take away the financial side of the beast, that's a huge impact, not just politically, but across the entire spectrum, and that's happening. That's why, Public Square sponsoring an event like this, having the guts to go out there and do that, where they're finding people who are of like mind, who understand what's going on, and by sucking the funds out of the system, you naturally weaken that system also. So it's so critical that we just stop. It's so easy just to hit the button on Amazon, and then then Jeff Bezos takes his $10 billion to every lobbyist that they own in Washington, D.C., and they get what they want each and every time, whether it's good for the American people or a total abject disaster. And it's always the latter. It's always the latter. So, we have to play both of those games.
I just want to say we've got 5 minutes left before the Trumps have to get to the airport, and we've been very lucky to have them for so many hours today, and the whole panel. Would you agree with me? So I propose to use the last 5 minutes just for quick snappers, and ending with Chris Pavlovsky, our great supporter, benefactor, and the brains behind Rumble. So unless, Chris, you have another plan, I propose we conclude the panel with quick statements. It's been wonderful to hear so many voices. What a great spectrum of opinions. Let's start with my friend David Frei. Viva Frei.
You asked the question earlier, I'll make sure this on, that more people are waking up in the States, sort of, and I think it's what happens when they overplay their hand and they come for you. The old poem is, you don't do anything until they come for you. In the States, they came for a great many people. They've done it here now as well. And I think by the way, earlier on when I looked at the camera in my dramatic moment and I think I said Trump instead of Trudeau. Because of all the things people call Trump, blackface is not one of them. Yeah. But so that was.
I almost disavowed David. I was like, listen, we've been friends for a while, but now you're out.
So they always end up by overplaying their hands, and I think Trudeau might have overplayed his hand here when, for example, kicking Politeness out of Parliament for the day. That's overplaying your hand to the point where now everybody sees it.
Thanks, David. Glenn, what a pleasure to meet you in person. I can't believe how far you've traveled. You've given so much to us today. Give us a final thought.
So I'll just tell one quick anecdote. I've been with Rumble at Rumble now, I think, for 2 years, a little bit more than that. And I noticed when I went there, and then other people started going there, and it started growing in the public consciousness, you saw this intense media attack immediately emerge. They used all the standard insults that they use anytime they want to destroy anyone's reputation. It's like a Kremlin outlet, and that's why they can't grapple with the fact that Russia just banned Rumble, because it's kind of odd for them simultaneously to be a pro-Kremlin disinformation outlet and simultaneously be banned in Russia. That's why they can't mention it, because they've been calling them a Kremlin agent for so long. But also calling Chris, the founder and the CEO of Rumble, this fascist and far-right extremist. I remember like hearing this at the time when it became this media script, and I was like, what? Chris? You guys have heard, he's Canadian, like very Canadian. And I have never once heard Chris in my life express any idea that could accurately be described as like far right or fascist, but Chris is a believer in free speech. He's devoted himself to free speech. And all my life, that was an idea that was just basic liberalism, like liberalism not in a partisan sense, but just being a Western liberal. It has now become, as you guys mentioned earlier, free speech has become coded as like a fascist idea. It's like, what? Every fascist government in the world has never offered free speech. They've always imposed censorship. It's like a hallmark of fascism, not to defend free speech, but to impose censorship. And I think what it shows is like how desperate the media is to crush any outlet or any platform that allows other voices to be heard. They're so desperate to win back their monopoly on information. And the reason isn't only because they don't want dissenting voices to be heard, it's because they want only their voices to dominate like they used to. And I think the best thing to take away from this is, although you can complain about that, and we should, there is so much reason for optimism. The emergence of this independent media, no one cares anymore what those outlets say. Every time I read myself being called a fascist or whatever, I don't even care anymore because I know people have tuned them out. The emergence of independent media and the commitment to free speech ensures that we can always gather like this, and as always we can gather like this and on the internet, there's always so much hope to take them down. History shows that.
Thank you.
Well, I'm fairly confident that both Glenn and I never thought that we'd be on stage with such alt-right extremists like Glenn Greenwald. But I think to your point is, you're right, and Viva, you said it as well. That pendulum has overcorrected so much. They'd gotten so comfortable with the media and with tech running cover that they really sort of opened the kimono to their true intentions and just how radical and far they are. And honestly, I don't think it aligns with the vast majority of people in the U.S. or Canada. I think there's a great number of independents. There's those on the radical side of the extreme side of both spectrums, frankly. But I think people now understand just what's at stake. And so I think my closing message would be for everyone to get involved, because you have no choice. You can no longer sit aside. You can still be polite. I don't always recommend it, because I think our governments and those in the media have taken our politeness and taken advantage of that, and they've weaponized it against us. So I think we got to be a little more assertive than that in our language. But we do have to get involved. We have to talk to our neighbors. We have to explain to them the things that they will not see otherwise. You'll see it on Rumble, but you're not going to see it by turning on the CBC. So we have to understand that. We have to make sure that people get what is at stake. Just the extreme nature of it. And I think if we do that, we actually win resoundingly. But we all have to do it. It's not going to happen because one guy, like a Donald Trump, is out there saying it. They've shown that they will cancel, arrest, jail the most powerful people in the world. We need to do that as a collective. And when we do that and we band together, they will not silence us all.
Thank you.
I want to say to the beautiful people of Canada, who are incredibly well-mannered and well-behaved, thank you. We owe you a debt of gratitude for producing this Canadian that helped to make free speech great again. And if I can ask you, thank you, Chris, with any takeaway, you can be both courteous and courageous. That's my message to Canada, because you want to fight for your children and for future generations. Do not wait for your voices to be heard before it is too late and you don't recognize your country. Think about what you can do today to exercise your free speech, your voice, to actually express your values with where you shop, with who you listen to, for the platforms that you support. It is worth it. And quite frankly, it's too great of a country to let it go down to decline the way that some of the Marxists that are here want to do it. So stand up for what you believe in, and it's simplistic but not sophomoric, because if you do this, then you will do what? Make Canada great again.
Well, we're almost done an amazing day, and I can't even believe that you came here after your surgery. I mean, you came in on crutches and
Not
you
a
walk on the
snowflake.
stage.
No
Unbelievable.
snowflake here.
Oh,
Okay?
my
We just do
goodness.
it. If I say I'm going to be somewhere, we're going to be there.
Thank you for that. But the man who made this all possible, not only the platform, but the financial means to have this event, despite the attempt to cancel it by the government that owns the land under this building, is Chris Pavlovsky. And Chris, I want to thank you on behalf of not only everyone in the room, but everyone watching at home and everyone who has used Rumble to access the truth. Thank you for allowing Rebel News to succeed and thrive. It's a personal debt I have to you. Why don't you wrap up the conference today with some thoughts? Give us a little hope.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ezra. So first, I want to thank the sponsors, Public Square and 1775 Coffee, for helping us out on this event. I'm going to thank again because, like I said, this was put together in 2.5, 3 weeks by our event staff team and the marketing team, and everyone else, the creator teams, everybody that's here. So thanks to the Rumble staff and the Rebel News staff for putting it together. And the biggest thanks goes to all the speakers coming from all over the world, literally, for being at this event and voicing their speech here in Canada. So thank you guys for coming. And just to end off, I'll keep it really short. I've been fighting for freedom of expression, our human right. I'm not sure if everybody knows, but it's Article 19 in the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It is actually a human right, freedom of expression. And I've been fighting for this in a real aggressive way since about 2020. I didn't really think it was going to take the turn that it did. But I've been fighting for this really hard. I've been doing a lot of fighting in the United States for this, making sure it goes well all around the world, pushing back against governments. And as a Canadian born and raised in Canada, I will tell you, I will fight tooth and nail against Bill C-63 and any government. And any government, regardless of their political affiliation, that tries to infringe on that basic human right. So I'm not going to stop. I will not quit. And I will do everything I can to make sure this doesn't happen. And you can count on me to really give it a real effort. Thank you for coming out.
Ladies and gentlemen, that marks the end of Rumble Live in Toronto. Thank you. And on behalf of us at Rebel News and all the presenters, goodbye. And keep fighting for freedom.